Hello, today we will be using the AlignmentGuide SwiftUI modifier to position an arrow beside any specific view. We will encase this capability in a custom modifier so that we can add it to any view. Additionally, we will also create a global modifier so that we can present different arrows on different views. We will start by creating a demo view. In this view, we will have 4 buttons, and when we tap on a button, we want an arrow to appear on this button. Now that our view is ready, let's move on to create the arrow that we're going to show. So the arrow is going to be a shape. I already have a snippet since creating a path is not going to be the focus here. We have an arrow, it has 2 directions. Depending on the direction that the shape is created with, we draw a different path. So now let's add the arrow to our demo view. The way that we're going to do this is with a C stack. So we have our content view, which is the V stack with the 2 H stacks, and then we have the arrow, which is position left. As you can see, because it's a shape, it's taking up the whole C stack. Let's add a frame to control its size. And there we have our arrow. As it was mentioned in the intro, we are going to use the SwiftUI modifier alignment guide. For this, we need to create our own horizontal and vertical alignment. So let's do all of this on a separate file just to keep things organized. Our custom alignments are going to be declared inside the alignment, so we'll create an extension for it. We need to have 2 things to create an alignment. We need to have a horizontal and a vertical alignment. And to create either of those, we need to have an alignment ID. So we create a focus H alignment, that's an alignment ID. To conform to this, we just have to implement the default value. So the default value here will be using the context, horizontal alignment center. We'll create another one, focus V alignment, which is going to be vertical alignment, and it's going to be exactly the same, only using the center from the vertical alignment. With the alignment IDs, we can now create the horizontal and vertical alignment. Okay, and finally, what we are going to use here is the focus alignment, which will be an alignment. The initializer requires a horizontal and vertical alignment, so we're going to pass the focus horizontal alignment and focus vertical alignment. Moving to our demo view, in the C stack we can enter an alignment, so we can enter our custom alignment, the focus alignment, and nothing changes. Now with this, we're ready to use alignment guide. Now, alignment guide, you'll notice requires either a horizontal or vertical alignment. We cannot pass the focus alignment. And this is why we made internal the focus H alignment and focus V alignment, because we're going to use them for alignment guide. So let's add that here. Notice how the arrow, because we use the focus horizontal alignment, the arrow is now aligned horizontally with the top left button. Let's add a vertical alignment, and look at that. Our 2 views are centered and only the arrow moved. Let's move these two alignment guides to a different button and see how the arrow will reposition itself. Okay, we're good to go. Now what we want to do is we don't want to have to add these two alignment guides. So what we will do is extract this functionality to another modifier. Now we're going to be using another convenience modifier from Vue that we're going to create. It's going to be an extension of Vue, and it's going to be a conditional modifier. So instead of having to do if this, then apply this, if else, apply another thing, or just have the same view, we'll have all of this in a modifier, which we will call if modifier. It will be a function of Vue, and we will be able to use it on anything. Basically, if we meet a condition, we will apply a modifier. If not, then we will just return the same view. Our method needs to conform to generic since we don't know what view we are returning. But what's important here is we will have two parameters. One is the condition, which will be a Boolean, and the other one will be a builder, which is just a closure that takes in this view's type, so self with uppercase S, and returns content, which is our generic another view. Now, in the SwiftUI code, in the view, we just need to, in this closure, apply the modifiers that we want to if the condition is met. And here we just apply the view builder if the condition is true, else we just, well, return self. Reminder that we don't actually need to use the return word since this function is marked with the add view builder annotation. Let's use this new if on our button to apply the alignment guides. So if we are, which one is showing top left, then we will apply the builder, which in this case is going to be the alignment guide. Let's add this if modifier to the other buttons with the different toggles that we already created. Now let's run the preview and test our new modifier. So notice how only when we toggle on the Boolean, the alignment guide modifiers are being applied. Right now, the arrow sometimes is centered between two buttons because it's applying the two alignment guides at the same time. So now that we have the desired behavior, let's encase this in a single modifier so that we don't need to type each time if modifier with the two alignment guides. We will call this FocusModifier since we want the user to focus on some view. That's why we are adding an arrow besides the view. The only thing that our modifier needs to do in the body function is apply the modifiers that we already applied to each of the buttons. The modifier will take on a condition Boolean, but we'll make this binding. You'll see why later on. Let's now use the focus modifier in our demo view instead of copy pasting the alignment guide modifiers everywhere. Let's create now a different modifier which will do the work of encasing the view in a C-stack with our custom alignment and drawing the arrow. So we'll call this FocusAreaModifier, and these two modifiers, the FocusModifier and FocusAreaModifier, will work in conjunction. Let's test our preview. And as you can see, everything still works the same. The only difference is now, instead of something that only belongs to this view, it can be applied to any view by adding these two different modifiers. Let's now further improve this experience where when we tap on another button, meaning we want the user to focus on something else, we need to remove the alignment guide from the previous modifier that was toggled on and enable only the next one. To achieve this behavior, we will need view models. First, let's add one to our focus modifier. Here, we will be responding to changes in the condition. This is why we wanted to have the condition be a binding variable, because we can call the onChange modifier. So when we detect that the condition changed, we want to change the isActive in our view model. Now, likewise, we will be listening to the isActive published variable with the onReceive modifier. A reminder here that when you add the $sign to a published variable, you will have a publisher, and that's what the onReceive modifier needs. Only when this variable changes to false, we will change the condition to false. And well, with this, I actually realized we should still use the condition here. Now, why are we doing this? This is because our FocusModifier is going to listen to changes from somewhere else. And when it detects some change, it will disable the current condition for this modifier. The class that is going to be responsible of notifying the FocusModifier is going to be another view model that's going to be introduced by our FocusAreaModifier, which is going to be our GloablFocusAreaViewModel. And how we will enable other views to retrieve this view model is through the EnvironmentObject modifier. Here we can pass any observable object, which can be our GloablFocusAreaViewModel. We'll create this as a state object of our view modifier. Now, if we go to our focus modifier, we can retrieve this global view model using the environment object annotation. We'll create a private variable, and we can retrieve it just by, well, the annotation and declaring a type for our variable. And this is what I was mentioning, that our two view modifiers work in conjunction. One of them inserts this environment object and the other one retrieves it. Now we have a way in which the two view models can communicate. Since we will be communicating changes from the different focus view modifier view model, we will need them to have IDs so we can tell them apart. Now our global view model needs a method where we can communicate changes that happen. For now, we will pass the value of the condition and the ID of the view model. And we will call this method on the onChange in the focus modifier. Now, reminder that we just want to keep the focus of the user on one view, meaning that only if the value was turned on, we want our view model to listen for changes, because if the flag is turned on for another modifier, we want this one to turn off automatically. We don't want the user to toggle off the previous one and then enable the other one. So for that, we will listen for changes. By listening for changes, what we will do is using combine. Our global view model will have a publisher that we can sync into. The publisher that we are going to listen to is going to be a current values object that will have the ID of the focus modifier that's currently displaying the arrow. So when we are notified that a value turned on for a certain focus, we're going to communicate with our publisher that we turned on the alignment for a certain ID. Then in our focus modifier, we listen to this publisher. If the ID of the focus that was turned on does not match ours, then we change is active to false, because in our view, we are listening to changes in this variable with onReceive. We will change the condition to false. Let's test what we have so far. Let's enable top left, top right. There we go. And it's turning off the other conditions. That's why the arrow is no longer displayed in the middle of the two buttons. Now what we want is that when none of the flags are turned on, we have no point of showing the arrow. We don't want to show an arrow in the middle of the screen not pointing to any view. What we're doing here is we're keeping the ID of the focus that we are showing the arrow for. Every time we change a value to true, we update this value. When the value is turned to false, if we get an update from the ID that we were showing the arrow from, we remove the arrow. Let's test it now. Notice how our preview starts with no arrow, and only when we tap to toggle one of the flags, the arrow appears. If we toggle back one of the buttons, the arrow disappears. Now let's take care of the fact that we are positioning the arrow on top of the view. We want to point on the view, so the arrow shouldn't be, well, right on top, it shouldn't be center. So first, let's add the focus position. We either want the arrow to be on the left or on the right. Our view, our global focus area will have this position, and that will affect how we are displaying the arrow. So depending on the position, we change the direction of the arrow. Now, who is going to be changing the position of the arrow? Well, each of the modifiers that calls the change value, since when implementing the focus modifier, it's when the developer will decide if they want to position the arrow to the left or to the right of the view. Since we added the focus position to our modifier, we need to update it. So let's add the left and right position correspondingly. And what's causing the arrow to appear right on top of the view is our horizontal alignment and the vertical alignment. So let's change the horizontal alignment so that depending on the position, we will show it either on the leading or trailing side. The padding that we are getting by adding the leading or trailing alignment, I already know that it's not enough. So let's add an additional arrow padding. Also, depending on the position, it will be either negative or positive. And let's move it 30 points and see how it looks. Let's check out our preview. Much better. Now the arrow appears on the side and the padding seems to be correct. Right now, our demo view is only accessible through the preview. We need to add it to the app so that we can see it when running on a simulator or on a device. We can do that in the WWDC tab view. Not only are we gonna add the demo view, but as an additional challenge, let's add the focus to an existing view that we already have, our books. So let's add a new button. The button will not do anything right now, but it's new. We just added this, so we want the user to focus on it. So let's do what we did in the demo view. To the main view, we will add a modifier, the FocusAreaModifier. Then in our view model, let's create a flag to show the focus. We will toggle this on after, let's say, 2 seconds that we initiated the view. For that, we can use dispatch queue main.async after. And the only thing missing now is adding the focus modifier to the button, since here is where we want the focus. We'll add the flag that we just created in our view model, and the position, let's add it to the left. Let's run and see what happens. Okay, so we log in into the app. Let's open our demo view. So it behaves like the preview. Everything seems fine. Let's open books. Okay, so the books loads. There we have our button, and 2 seconds after, we have our view. Notice that we had two global modifiers, each with its own environment object, and nothing happens. The two can exist in the same app in different views. And that was all. Playing around with AlignmentGuide taught me a lot. It's still a very tricky modifier to use, but as you can see, very powerful. We can move around this arrow without altering or having to know the exact coordinates of the views that we want to focus on. For now, we're just displaying an arrow, but maybe we can enhance it in future lessons. Hope you liked this one. Bye.